Start off with roll.
Here.
Gippin. Here. Peoples. Lewis.
Here.
Castle.
Here.
Costa. Here. Reed.
Here.
And Richards is absent. She suffered a loss of family, so she is absent for this evening. Approval of last meeting's Lewis.
Yes.
Castle.
Yes.
Costa.
Yes.
Reed.
Here.
Boyd, yes. Okay. And item number 3 is our public comment. Want to let everybody to allow 30 minutes in total for public comment. That will be 3 minutes per person. We also have, I believe, the comments so that we can, as a board, out.
Reflecting about after reading the rules. I wanted to say it would be great if there was a specific section in the rules just for public participation and concreting the form being optional and also the ability for attendance virtually for public commenters. I know I had a DM in my Instagram last week about that. I would also, just reading through my notes here real quick, give me a second. Yes, and then the other thing that I've been DM'd about today specifically was digitizing and updating the complaint process. If we could get a digital form that allowed people to submit, make it secure, make it encrypted, but have it exterior to Akron Police and the administration and keep it for the board specifically, and then the notifications go out to the board and the respective parties that need to be notified of a complaint. But I think digitizing, particularly being on the ground during protests, during a lot of the last year, we see a lot of incidents of misconduct and moments where citizens would like to give a complaint, but a paper form that is 4 pages long and is not accessible on your phone, where most of us live and work and play, is just simply not accessible enough for the needs of this body and for the needs of transparency.
Could I ask you a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Maybe this went by too fast, but did you say something about confidentiality of complaints?
I think I was talking about the security and the encryption. I think having a secure platform to be able to anonymously and without tracking or surveillance options submit a complaint truly anonymously is an important aspect of the complaint process that should be upheld if there ever is a digital component in the complaint process. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
When, I'm sorry, when you say make an anonymous complaint, is it to the board? Is that what you want to make an anonymous complaint to the board? Or do you want to make an anonymous complaint to be investigated by the police department?
That's a great question. I don't know the inner workings of all of the complaint process. I know we've talked about it a lot. But I think the ability to create an anonymous complaint and maybe check off where the complaint is sent might be a good option, but housing that specific digital platform for complaint processing through the board specifically, having a certain amount of independence.
I'm still unsure. I know that the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, states that they don't have to investigate anonymous complaints. So I don't know how we could do that if they won't investigate an anonymous complaint. There are even situations where there's been complaints that have been filed that weren't signed, that weren't investigated.
I appreciate you allowing me to converse a little bit. I personally think the FOP agreement needs to be restructured in a lot of different ways, but I think that is definitely one of them. The complaint process should be taken seriously, should be more accessible, and it is simply not to the standard of that level of transparency and accountability that citizens who face misconduct, brutality, by our local officers, they deserve more. And so that's why I brought that up.
So let me say this 1 second. And Fran, you can correct me if need to be. What I'm hearing is two different discussions. One is making it digital to where, to your point, it is more accessible. It may take more time to get it to where it is, I think, Mr. Young, was what you were saying, Mr. Young, as far as making it anonymous. Is that the word that we're using?
That was the word that he said, making anonymous complaints.
Okay, but we could essentially, the FOP has nothing to do with us making it digital, but it's they want to, but from an anonymous perspective, in the collecting and the bargaining agreement is what you're talking about, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Now,
so digital is not the issue in the collective bargaining agreement, it's making it anonymous.
I don't understand what we're going to digitize. Are we going, does that mean that the
They
complaint?
just want to be able to access it online, I think, from my understanding.
So the complaint as it is now, the form itself, you can't actually fill it out on your phone.
Right.
You need to print it out, you need to
Yeah.
scan it, you need to do whatever you may, so it could be a fillable, it should be a
Yeah.
fillable PDF. So where
I've been
everything's
working on
uploaded.
that since we started this, that, you know, we can download a citizen complaint, but when they fill it out, they have to either mail it in, bring it in, or something else. So the way around that is I just accept an email, and I tell them to start out their email, please accept this complaint, or this email is my official complaint.
Yeah.
So they can do this by email on your phone or anything that you have anytime, and just send it directly to me.
Go ahead, Mr. Giffen.
Mrs. Reed, did you want to ask something? I'm just kind of following up on what Fran, I'm sorry, do you mind if I had another question for you?
Do you have something?
I'm still struggling to understand what, this concept of anonymous. And I don't think we're, just so clear, I don't personally think that our complaint handling procedure is necessarily going to be affected by the FOP agreement. That's a big open question yet to be resolved. But I'm struggling with understanding if you're saying that a complaint of that kind to us would be entirely anonymous to us. In other words, we would not know who was submitting it versus maybe the better concept is confidentiality, if that were legally possible. I don't know if it would be. But are you saying literally we don't know who the complainant is, or are you saying in some fashion our procedures ought to maintain the confidentiality of the complainant?
I think both are very interesting models that should be explored.
Okay.
I don't know the laws and regulations around that, and what this board can keep confidential versus
Yeah, I don't
other.
either, but, I mean, maybe it's possible, but I think it's very hard to investigate an anonymous complaint. Just as a practical matter, it is very hard to investigate it.
I think also, if I may, I'm so sorry. If I may, I think a lot of folks that I've been conversing with, because I've handed a lot of emails, phone calls, and these complaints in over the last year and a half, having some sort of ability to have anonymity in some sort of fashion protects the complainant from retaliation, unwanted surveillance. Fear generally drives a lot of not complaining. And I think ridding the barriers to complaints, not only accessibility with the digital function, but also the fear of any unwanted consequences or unsavory actions from people in positions of power, I think is also an important component of this.
I understand you're saying both, and that's what I needed to know. So, yeah, thanks.
Mr. Wilson, one of the other things that hasn't been considered in what you just said is that complaints that are third-party complaints don't have to be investigated by the department as well. In other words, if you witness something happening to a citizen and you file a complaint, they don't have to investigate that because it's considered a third-party complaint. I think all that needs to be revised. Now, I'm not saying that none of them are ever investigated, but a great many of them are not investigated simply because, is it in the contract or in the contract says they don't have to investigate third-party complaints? Yeah.
Chief, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Without some more information or corroborating evidence associated with that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Any other public comments?
Hi, my name is Teresa. I wasn't planning on commenting, but I just want to second basically everything that Fran said. I have no record or anything, but I would personally not want to put my name on anything going to the police department. I would not feel safe at that point. So I just wanted to reiterate that. Yeah.
So, again, I'm sorry, just to clarify, you would, if it were a complaint to us that did not go to the police department, would that?
Quite honestly, I don't trust you guys yet. I don't know you yet. We don't know what the policy is yet. If you do what I'm hoping that you do, then I would feel comfortable with that.
And what would that be?
More than reform. So I don't.
I'm sorry, I mean broadly what we would do. Okay.
Well, my goodness, I don't have that much time.
No,
I mean, I just think that the department needs just revised. I mean, there are a lot of people that don't feel safe. There are a lot of people that, you know, you have a taillight out or anything, and you just don't feel. I can't really, unless I sat down and wrote it out. I can't really express it because it's just so much fear and so much anger with everything. So I think that for me to be able to answer your question, I would have to see how you guys work as a body together and how you respond to the citizens. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Joyce Penfield. I appreciate the openness to have conversation. In some places, there's an ombudsperson, and that person is hired to be completely neutral to resolve things. And that person provides an element of creating trust and transparency. I think what we're talking about is trust and transparency. And it seems to be complicated because it's in the hands of the very end. It's treated as, complaints are treated as a job performance matter. But we in the community are thinking of it as interaction and protection and trust matter. Just to give you one example of how little things become big things, if we only think of the complaint procedure as excessive use of force or excessive abuse, I think we miss what's going on. I had a circle of, a couple of weeks ago, I was in charge of doing a deliberative dialogue with a group of individuals that had been in the march that went down to the Justice Center. And all of them were in their 20s, except for one other person John Beatty, who's in his 80s. I did not directly ask, but I gave an example of my own history. And around the table, one at a time, these were black individuals, male and female. Each person, out of the blue, began to narrate their experience from the time they were 5 sometimes and beyond, and how they had been encountering with a police. And it didn't have to be, it's setting forth the whole pattern. It didn't have to be excessive use of force. I could narrate those examples to you. In some cases, in very simple case, just the day before, a gentleman said he never had any bad encounter. But that night, the night before, going down the street, he encountered a police car that didn't have their lights on. So his wife was driving, he was sitting in the car, and he had no bad encounters with police. They flashed their lights to let the policeman know. He turned around, and then they became, how do I say, victim. They became a cause, and there was a really negative interaction. These are simple examples of what happens that builds up mistrust, and it leads to excessive force and other things, because relationships are well, the lack of dignity and respect just keeps mounting up. And on both sides, there is a tension and an anger. That's where the anger is coming from, sometimes just being treated with worth and dignity. And I realize there's stress on both sides because of the profession and because of how people are trained. But I think that's part of our work to figure out in the community, how do we, through transparent policies, how do we cut through that? How do we make it better? How do we weed out individuals who aren't willing to perform in the way that respects all people, or in a small way? I'm not saying everyone is, but I'm saying every profession has their standards. And so I think the issue of anonymity is scratching at the surface of these roots that are haunting us. And maybe we have to go to the roots as well as the surface. Instead of patching up things, we have to find a way of approaching, training, encountering that cuts through that, especially in the Black community. That's what I heard around the table. And I heard youth who were willing to really try to do something that changed it. They hadn't given up. And I think that's an amazing thing for us to work with. So I offer that. Thank you.
Excuse me, ma'am, what's your name again?
Reverend Joyce Penfield.
Okay. Reverend Banfield, do you think focus groups within the community between the citizens and police volunteers would be helpful for something like that?
Okay, and when I was in Providence and I worked with a commissioner of police, a group of us, interfaith, interracial pastors, we actually created those. We had 80 individuals in a temple. We did it, and we had 80 police that were assigned by the commissioner. These were the foot police and so forth. And we had 80 citizens, a multiracial group. And we had circles, and we had 4-4, and we had kind of a structured facilitation. That really helped. That worked well. But I'm feeling that at the time, at the climate here, we need something a little bit before that, because there's so much anger that I'm afraid that could be negative. There might be a prior step to work on, because right now, there's a lot, I heard it. I heard people say that they were really, really angry, but they wanted to do something to make it different. So
we have to start somewhere. I mean,
well, I think our group of listening to these young people, and they came up with ideas on how to change things. Really interesting. I could tell you a couple of them. So that's how much hope. They came up with an idea that people would throw out. that the police unions, if they had people who were coming into the police who had these more positive attitudes and actions, then they would promote or elect people who would then, be in the community to change the flavor. And they had other ideas that were really, I think, just tapping into their ideas would be a way to start. And then those who had felt that there was some transparency or hope, then they might be ready to sit down. So I would be selective because I wouldn't want it to come out in a negative way. But it's a great idea.
Would you be willing to email those ideas to one of us?
Love to. I would love to.
Okay, we can talk after.
Okay, thanks.
And so, Reverend Joyce, I appreciate that so much, and I appreciate your service to our community. I know we have sat on some committees and some boards together, and I've always had a tremendous amount of adoration for you personally and your willingness to serve and to give. And I believe that this is an opportunity for our community engagement subcommittee that is led by Ms. Lewis to really touch base with you and to continue to see how do we first of all get in front of some of these community members and hear their voice. And I think that as you talk about some anger, some hurt, and even as it's been brought up about the distrust, I would say that that probably goes on both sides as well. I'm sure there are some officers who live in this city, who are from this city, who are angry as well at some of the things that they're seeing and going on, and also has their own share of distrust, maybe internally. And so I think that there are many of us, and I hate to say this, if you will, but collectively, let me just say that word collectively and not sides, because I don't want to talk about sides, because I think we have to adjust and begin to shift that narrative of sides. But I think from a collective perspective, there's many of us who are citizens who are serving this city that fall in line exactly what you were saying, and also what you were saying, ma'am. I appreciate your openness and transparency. And what I hope is that we earn your trust by having these public meetings, but also having public comment at our meetings. And hopefully we can gain that from you. And I'm not expecting a timetable on that. I think that happens over time. And so we have to move at the speed of trust with one another. And what I'd like to say is we have to do that as well as a board. And so some of us know each other. Some of us, this is the first time of us knowing one another as well. But I appreciate this process of being able to do that with each other. So, Reverend Joyce, if you don't know Ms. Lewis, I know she would love to talk to you and to connect. Oh.
We've met several times.
Awesome. And so I think, in retrospect, how we can kind of work together with it, I think would be really, really awesome. So thank you.
Thank you for letting me talk.
Any further public comment?
Just really quickly, I wanted to, as we kind of figure out how these meetings are going to look and go, I just wanted to make that observation that when folks come to give us public comment, I think that we need to be careful that we don't get frustrated if folks don't have the answers. Just an observation. I know people are coming forward to express how they're feeling and not necessarily provide solutions. And I just want us to be careful of that.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. Any further public comment? Okay, if there's not, yeah.
Phil would like to know if you could start on the governance first. He had to step out.
Okay, no problem at all. We'll move to agenda item 5, and we'll come back to 4, which is our subcommittee report out. And first on that subcommittee is governance, so we'll be hearing from Mr. Gippen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Governance Committee met this past Monday, the 1st of May. The item of business was the well, the collective drafting of a description of functions following on what we were charged to do last week at this meeting. We did unanimously approve the description of functions that's been circulated to the board this evening, at least for the sake of discussion whether or not it is acted on tonight. I'll move adoption of this description of functions for the Governance Committee.
Mr. Gibbon, before we get to that, would you mind reading through each item on here, just because I know we have.
Oh, sure.
We do have the public here, and I'd love for them to hear this.
Oh, I'm sorry, and they don't have this draft. I beg your pardon, I'll be happy to do that.
Okay, yeah, I'd just like to read through it, just that way it's in there, we can hear it, and if it does help for us to build trust, I don't mind issuing a copy, but at least let's kind of read through it, if you don't mind reading through it.
Oh, I don't at all. No.
Okay, thank you.
It's a bit long, but yes, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, that's fine, thank you.
Right. It's headed Akron Citizens Police Oversight Board Governance Committee Description of Functions. 1, review board rules and propose revisions to them as necessary. 2, propose initial board procedures and then additions and revisions to them as necessary. Such initial procedures to include but not be limited to the following subject matter: A, external and independent oversight and review of policing practices within the city of Akron, Ohio, not encompassed by specific charter mandates and authority or other specific procedures of the board. B, receipt of complaints from the public alleging misconduct by members of the Division of Police. C, investigation of alleged misconduct by members of the Division of Police. D, reporting of findings and recommendations concerning alleged misconduct by members of the Division of Police to the mayor and council. E, consideration of whether investigations of the operations of the Division of Police should be made on the board's own initiative. F, conduct of own initiative board investigations and the reporting of findings and recommendations concerning them to the mayor and council. G, requesting records from the Division of Police or other city offices and departments. H, compelling the attendance and testimony of witnesses and the production of documents, photographs, audio recordings, electronic files, and other tangible evidence. I, issuing an annual report to the community of the board's activities and its recommendations made to the mayor and council. J, consideration of alleged staff or board member malfeasance, misfeasance, nonfeasance, incompetence, incapacity, or neglect of duty, including but not limited to the purpose of possible referral to the mayor for consideration of board member removal with the consent of council. Then main paragraph 3, monitor board compliance with the requirements of federal, state, and local law, and with board rules and procedures. Sub A within that, make reports and recommendations concerning compliance and non-compliance as necessary. 4, communicate with legal counsel as necessary to the committee's functions or as requested by the board chair, board vice chair, or the full board. 5, assist the independent police auditor and the auditor's staff in carrying out their functions as requested by them or as the board directs. 6, assist other committees and the board officers in carrying out their functions as requested. 7, take other actions required by the rules or procedures of the board or as directed by the board.
Thank you, Mr. Giffman, for that. I know that that was lengthy, but I do believe that it was important. Is there further discussion?
I don't think it has a second, Mr. Chairman.
Oh,
Uh,
we, go.
Can we, thank you, Mr.
I second it, so we can move into discussion.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, may I have some concerns about this particular governance committee. I was under the impression that its primary function was going to be number 3, to monitor board compliance with requirements of federal, state law, with board rules and procedures. To me, it overlaps a lot of responsibilities. I personally believe it would be best to recommend that we add a policing practices and oversight committee as opposed to meshing it with governance. But that's my opinion. I'd like to hear what everyone else has to say. I was under the impression that this was going to largely be, again, more so 3, which is to monitor board compliance and our functions within this room and how we conduct ourselves.
Mr. Chairman, I think, certainly my understanding was broader, that we were to come up with proposals to the board of what amounts to the operational structure. And we might or might not have roles as a committee in carrying out matters within within that structure. For the most part, the A through pretty much J, all of it, of that second paragraph, that is all verbatim from the charter. And what was intended is not that this committee, governance committee, would necessarily carry out those particular functions. It was only that we would propose a set of procedures that would set the structure for how those would be done, leaving aside who does them. So it was to create the structure. I mean, not just the rules per se, but the rules call for, if you look at the charter, I mean, there need to be procedures. So how are we going to do all this stuff? But that is not the same thing as saying governance would do it. Does that make it more clear?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, number on J, isn't that already in our charter or in our rules?
No.
The malfeasance and misfeasance?
Well, that is the charter language. But we don't have, I don't even think in the draft rules we've got, I don't know, Brandon, do you know, but I don't think there's any procedure set out for how the board would address such matters. Now, just kind of going to Mrs. Reed's point, I mean, it seems to me that if there were such an issue come up, it's going to fall to whatever we're calling HR, to carry out the procedure of whatever that may be. But I think we need to have procedures for how we would address such matters if they'd occurred.
Because it is in there, I remember
it's in the
reading
charter.
it.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, it's in the charter already. So you're saying, just to make sure we're not reinventing the wheel, you're saying how we, the board, address malfeasance and misfeasance,
And possibly.
how we're going to
referrals from
address
there.
it amongst ourselves before we
Correct.
look at what the
Correct.
charter says.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you, Mr. Gibbon.
All right, any further discussion? All right, we'll
Yes, sorry, really quickly. With that being said, when we're looking at A through J, I'm not certain that we have a subcommittee that directly encompasses all of those components that were mentioned. And I think moving forward, maybe at some point today, it would be in our best interest to evaluate the subcommittee recommendations and consider having a subcommittee that specifically looks at A through J.
Mrs. Reed, again, I think I think it may be most appropriate for governance to, again, propose these procedures. But I don't disagree with you that there may well need to be created an investigative subcommittee, whatever you want to call it, that would implement those items that have to do particularly with citizen complaints. But
We're saying the same thing.
So who would make these determinations? I'm still on J. Who would make these determinations that someone is malfeasance?
I don't know.
Misfeasance?
I think that's what needs to be considered, is what would the procedure look like for dealing with this in terms of
Okay.
again, I have to think it's the HR committee, but I don't know. That's what would have to be flushed out in this procedure. And then I would have to think that we would want some form of due process before, particularly, if a board member is going to be recommended to the mayor for removal, for heaven's sakes, I would think that we would want some form of due process to deal with that. But that's all the stuff that would be flushed out in the procedure.
That's my question. Who does someone come to you with a complaint, and then, I mean, how are you structuring? This is my problem with not just this committee, but some other subcommittees. How do you structure J?
I don't know. I think that like all of these will be not easy procedures to formulate. But I don't have the answer. I don't know what that procedure looks like. It's going to take a lot of discussion. I would hope when we get to that one, for example, that we'd have direct input from the HR committee as to what that ought to look like, because it's probably going to fall to them. But I don't know the answer to your questions.
All right, thank you.
And just being consistent with the way that this is structured, it is not necessarily allocating that specific duty, but it's more so providing a framework that allows for the creation of policies to which would then oversee that process or speak to that process. And I think that this here is really it's key that we've got pretty, I guess, I was going back and forth about it because I was like, it'd be nice for us to have some broad, I guess, discretion to provide recommendations for the rules as like we have them already, the rules and procedures. But I guess as we discuss this now, there's a lot of overlap between some of the functions that are involved in the actual rules and procedures versus some of the other rules that need to be carried out here. So I guess I'm just curious to hear what everyone else's thoughts are.
It's just a bit confusing.
Super broad or?
Mr. Gibbon, I think you intentionally left it broad for the sake of it being more allocated to the subcommittees to interpret on their own. And I'll use Jay as an example because it's been the topic of conversation. That absolutely, in my mind, would fall in the HR committee as well. And it would be up to the HR committee, if I'm understanding right, to use this as a framework to further delegate what malfeasance, what incompetence and incapacity would look like, and then create more specifics to that so we would have something maybe more detailed to follow and understand.
Yeah. There would be, and this is a combination of both being broad, which, and Mr. Costa, you in particular kind of emphasized that was an important thing the other night. And so it's got some broad language, particularly item 7. But the idea on the more specific side was that this committee, and it just didn't seem like there was anyone else who was going to do it, would do the initial work of formulating these procedures. Not, again, welcoming anybody and everybody who wants to help do that. And again, good old Jay, I mean, I'd have to think that we'd need a lot of input from HR about that. But basically do this work of drafting procedures to bring to the board, to give ourselves the operating structure. And then, may not be doing much of anything of these things in terms of implementation. As you say, I think the monitoring is probably the long-term real function of that committee. But for the moment, we thought this is something that needed to be done, and that it fell to us best to do it. Does that make sense?
Any further discussion? We have a motion and a second on the floor. Before we take a roll call, do we feel comfortable voting? All right, roll call. Anaskevich.
I'm going to pass right now. I don't completely understand.
You want to abstain?
I want to abstain for now.
Gippin.
I'll vote yes.
Peoples.
Yes.
Lewis.
Yes.
Castle.
Yes.
Costa.
Yes.
Reed.
Yes.
Boyd is a yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I just, in particular, you know, Mrs. Anaskevich, this isn't locked in stone. This is something that we can change. The reason I paused a little bit is I'm uncomfortable if you're not fully understanding it. But and I'm happy to talk with you
appreciate that.
more. But if it appears to any of us that, you know what, this needs to be tweaked, we can do that anytime. This is our document. We can always amend it.
Okay, so this is just a boilerplate.
Well, no, this is real, but it can change very easily. You can just change.
Right, I guess I'm just struggling with the reporting process, like who's going to report to who that someone on the board is being is
Right.
engaging in malfeasance or misfeasance. That's what I'm struggling with. I don't.
Yeah, and that's down the line to figure out as we come up collectively with the procedure for J. Those kinds of questions would hopefully be resolved well in the procedure.
Okay, thank you.
But let's talk after. I want you to be comfortable with this.
Okay, thank you.
I would hope and believe that if any one of us were concerned about a board member involved in any form of J, that all of us hold a responsibility to say something, and not just a singular person or a subcommittee. So I think we all hold the responsibility to hold each other accountable, to say that, hey, I'm uncomfortable, I'm aware because, you know, so I think we all hold that responsibility. I don't think that falls on any one person or subcommittee. I think that's all of our responsibilities to acknowledge Jay for anyone else. I mean, being the chair, if anybody would say, hey man, you would acknowledge that on me. So I wouldn't want to say, from a standpoint of being so tactical that we're going through a certain channel, if any one of us see that about the other. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mr. Chair, I appreciate that, and that makes a lot of sense to me. But at the end of the day, we're all still getting to know each other. We all don't really know each other yet. And so that's why I'm not suspicious of anyone here. I'm just saying I just needed more clarification, which I think you just gave. And Mr. Chair, I think what you just said is palpable as well, because we're still getting to know each other. And so this kind of language, you know, on our third meeting, just kind of, I don't know, makes me feel a little different. That's all.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a further report for the committee, if that's
Please.
timely.
Yes.
We spent time then, frankly, most of the time, we actually got through the functions fairly quickly. We spent a lot of time talking about the process by which we would formulate a draft of the rules. The first item, which is, I think, probably is the one that's most important to get done, because we have to have rules, and they have to go to council, as we know. So we talked a lot about how to do that. And what our plan is that we gave ourselves a soft target of, I think would be the June 14th meeting if this board met. That Wednesday, if this board were meeting on the 14th. We gave ourselves a soft target of June 14 to be able to come to the board with draft rules. And that the process for doing that, and this overlaps to a degree, and we need to
Ms. Gibbon, I just want to make sure we're being clear. When you say drafted rules, you mean the rules that were given to us as draft rules to whatever amendments we need to make of those rules, so that we can turn them in so that they become official.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you for clarifying. Yeah, it would be more or less a more final, more processed version of those rules. That would be what we would then presumably vote to send to council. So going back to process, and this overlaps, I think, Ms. Lewis, with a little bit with your committee, but we felt that it was going to be important to get community input, public input on the rules, because they're so important. And I mean, we're even just hearing it, tonight, and I'm taking pretty careful notes on what was said about it. So what our plan still to be refined is that we might even be meeting more or less weekly for a bit. And we would probably do it at the main library, because that's fairly accessible, assuming we can get one of the conference rooms. And we would make a great effort to communicate to anybody who we think might possibly want to have input on these rules, so they know when we're meeting and where. And we would invite that, to get that input. And the other piece of it is that we're going to be looking at the rules of the existing, call them oversight boards. I mean, they've got different names, but particularly the ones from the Ohio cities. And we're going to be hopefully relatively easily, getting their comparable rules and maybe procedures. And may look a little more widely, see what, if it, in the literature, if it looks like there are some boards that have particularly good ways of operating, look for those rules too, so that we're able to bring what others have done to bear on what we finally come up with. So that's the process by which we are hoping, I think it's fair to say, intending to proceed. And, welcome to have input about that. If there's some different way of proceeding, happy to do it, and would certainly invite every board member to, come to those meetings and participate. That's what we want to do. I hope that's consistent with what the board wants.
I think we had a fairly spirited, in being fully transparent, we had a pretty spirited debate about the timeline and how long is needed before we move forward with bringing rules and procedures to council to consider. So I want to welcome really everybody's input with respect to, is a month too quickly? Is a month, how does this timeline feel just with respect to everybody? And while it's flexible, of course, I think the most important part and the most reoccurring thing that I've heard in the last week is just the importance of us being in front of the community and us building trust and holding ourselves out there. And so that's my only hesitation. While I completely believe that we could put forward a set of pretty good rules and procedures within that timeline, I'm again just wondering, does that afford enough opportunity? And so I just want to open it to everybody.
Well, as we even talked about that night, it's not a hard deadline. Frankly, I'm going to be shocked if we meet that deadline. But, I believe in deadlines, and then, because you can always bend them, but if we've got something to work against, that was the thought. We'll bring it to the board when we're comfortable.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Costa. And when you talk about looking at what other people, bringing in others who are already established in this type of thing, I think you also need to consider the demographics that they're working with. Everyone's demographics are different. Every police community, every police review board in every city is different based on the demographics of that city. So, I just want you to be mindful of that when you look into perhaps adapting someone else's, process or what have you. It may work for them, where they are, but it may not work for us where we are.
Maybe I should add, we're probably going to be looking at meeting either on a Tuesday or Thursday night, avoiding Monday. We met on a Monday this past week, but that's many other boards and councils meet, so probably Tuesday or Thursday, we'll figure it out, but we'll make sure that there's good notice of when it's going to happen.
I'd like to agree with Mrs. Anasevich, that, first of all, you said meeting at the library downtown. We have 10 wards in this city, and if you want to get everybody in the city involved in this, then you need to be in every ward. You just can't say, we're going to go downtown if you want that. And for getting rules and things from other agencies, you have to remember that a lot of these cities are under consent decrees. A lot of them are run by the administration. This is supposed to be an independent board.
So I want to, first of all, thank the Governance Subcommittee and also Chair Mr. Gibbon. I also want to bring for us in mind the focus that right now those are drafted rules. So technically, as a board, we are functioning without rules. And so the longer that we do that, it's going to be harder for us to build structure and to do what we have been appointed to do, okay? The next thing is, I appreciate wanting to involve the community in the drafted rules. However, I think making tours of 10 different wards prolongs that process to happen. And I think what we need to be going to the community with, per our community engagement subcommittee, is their thoughts about some of the policies and practices that need to be shifted versus our drafted rules. I think those are the conversations based on our community engagement subcommittee that we need to be having with the community. Based on some of the policies and the principles that are now in line that are happening, those are the conversations we need to have with them. As far as our drafted rules, those are things that I think that we need to put in place as a board so that we're not negligent in how we're operating. Because as to date, those are still drafted rules that we have not turned in to City Council so that there is a vote that we have this as a board. And so that's my concern with being a month out. I think a month out is fine. However, I think when we do our drafted rules, that becomes for us as far as our operational skill of what we do. I think what we need to lean into the community about is, again, some of the policies and the practices and the rules and regs that we need their help on as we make recommendations of things that possibly need to change from a policy and procedure perspective.
Who are we talking about when we say policies and practices? Are we talking about the Akron Police Department?
Yes.
I know that we feel pressed to adopt rules, but again, I think that we've got the mandate under the charter to operate, and we've got a framework provided there. And just for instance, Fran came in this evening and said some things about the complaint process that completely made me think about the rules and how we deal with the actual submission of complaints. And so I don't want to discount the value that can be added from community members with respect to the rules. And I know that the animosity comes from the policies and the procedures in which are leading to these encounters that are being negative, but I don't know, I don't think too much input or feedback can ever be a bad thing, and I don't want to discount the input that some of the unsuspected individuals in our communities could potentially have on our rules. And so I get the importance that we have them. I can appreciate a rule more than anybody else, but I strongly believe that once we pass a set of rules through City Council, it is going to be incredibly difficult for us to make changes. And so I don't know, I'm sorry to get stuck on that point, but, you know, that's just kind of where I'm at on it.
Mr. Chair, I think that we're mixing two things. Fran had mentioned about policies and rules and regulations related to the police, and what we're talking about is rules and regulations related to governance for us. And so can we make sure that we keep those two things clear when we're discussing it?
Mr. Chair, I want to say, I think the key word that we should always keep in mind is that we are the citizens, and it should always be prioritizing them, making them a part of any process that they want to be a part of. We want them to know that they are welcome. It is rare and unfortunate that citizens are not able to be involved in many government processes, and because this was made by our constituents, I think it's very important that anything that we can open up to them is available to them.
I do not disagree. There are the drafted rules that we were given that we need to read over and make amends to. And then there's the policies, like the complaint policy, that we receive from the community that we need to know how to go in and change. And so, to your point, Ms. Lewis, these are two different things that I think if we're not careful, it's gonna limit us in how we can move. And so I'm fine with June, I think you said June the 14th as a date. I'm fine with that. The process that we go through of how we get there, I'm fine with that as well. So are we making a motion to have that done by June the 14th, or are we leaving it open?
Mr. Chair, if I can request, I really would like that to be a soft target. Believe me, we get the point that we need to move as fast as we reasonably can. But I would prefer not to be held to an adopted deadline that we might not meet. We will work hard and fast, but responsibly, Mr. Chairman.
I want to talk with Reverend Lewis. What is it that we can do on the community relations side, and all of us can be a part of this discussion, to get as many community members involved, to let them know what's going on, what we are doing, and make sure that they can be a part of it. We don't have the ability right now to really set out mass communication yet through like social media, and I think that's something that we need to work on. So if anyone would like to engage, I'd like to know what can we do to get the citizens involved, because I thought Mr. Young and Mr. Gippen brought up a great point. Yes, the library is central. Yes, we do need to be mindful that we don't have, infinity to do this. But on the same token, we want to make sure we can get as many people involved. And I think it's important that we have discussion about how do we reach our community members.
Mr. Chairman, I took Mr. Young's point. Obviously we don't have time for 10 meetings, but we were at Highland last week, okay, earlier this week. Certainly it's easy enough to get library rooms, so that if we just plan out. And again, Ms. Lewis, I'd want your input on this and everybody's, but doing it at different library locations around the city, in the next few weeks, that makes sense to me. There's no magic to the main library. So good point.
Can we get Ms. Lewis's answer to Ms. Reed's question, please?
Right. So I don't want to jump ahead. I want to be able to give you somewhat of an overview of what we discussed with the subcommittee, if that's okay, and then just talk about the rough draft and the brainstorming that we did. Can I do that before we answer that question?
Well, first of all, are we done with governance subcommittee before we move?
I am, Mr. Chairman, unless somebody else has some more input they want to give us about how we do this rules process. I think good suggestions, and I think we've got a good balance here of getting it done. how to get it done. I'm done otherwise.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is we have a soft completion or landing on June the 14th.
Right.
Okay. Is that something that we need to make a motion on, or are we just saying that's a soft?
I would prefer if it were just left alone without a decision, but if the board wants to vote on it, and I have no objection to it, but I think we're going to be better off with just leaving it alone, understanding that we get the point that we need to get the job done.
All right. All right, we'll go to Human Resources Subcommittee next.
She's not here.
Huh? Okay, I'm sorry.
She's not
Community engagement?
Community engagement. So, we did an overview of what we feel like community engagement should look like, and this is merely a rough draft and brainstorming on our part. So the community engagement within the city context, and this is definition, community engagement provides a process that gives all stakeholders in the neighborhood/community the chance to influence administrative tasks and decision-making of the Citizens Police Oversight Review Board. And so we kind of mentioned that when we were giving our governance thing. So I want to make sure that we, sort of understand a community is not just an entity, a what, but it's a who. And so some community organizations provide the opportunity to provide space for those persons who just don't have a voice. So we said community is the warmth of the neighborhoods. It's a feeling of connectedness and engagement. And so how will we go about the question that we want to present, and it's going to be open to discussion, is how can we formulate our approach so that we would have a structured and yet flexible approach to engagement with respect to community stakeholders. So that's one of the questions that we have on the floor, or that's one of the questions that we posited for the subcommittee. So that's something that we can bring to this committee as well. How do we go about the approach of structuring and yet making sure that our approach with engagement is flexible? And then we said, if I may continue, we wanted to identify stakeholders. And so we said that stakeholders, obviously, in a warm market are our friends, family, and present volunteers. They're also community leaders and nonprofit organizations and just everyday people. And where do those community people meet? Recreational parks like Joy Park, Summit Lake, Elizabeth Park, Patterson, and what kind of agencies are we thinking provide community for people? Urban League, PAS, promoting adolescents through health services, nonprofits, so artists and even engaging the community learning centers and high schools.
Any further comment, discussion?
And there was a question that,
Oh.
and please, what was it again?
This was just to piggyback on the idea that the governance committee came up with, in that they wanted to engage the public in being a part of, correct me if I'm wrong, in being a part of helping draft the rules for our committee, not necessarily for policing, but how we govern ourselves. Is that correct? For the board, right. And so, again, we don't have right now a way to affect mass communication about what they're saying. So my question to you, being on community relations, is there any ideas that you or anyone else here could suppose to get the information out to get people to be a part of these meetings that are going to be weekly through the 14th of June?
I think
the
social
soft date.
media, public service announcements. Social media is probably going to be one of the fastest ways to get the word out inexpensively.
I haven't.
And you're on the community engagement subcommittee.
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
So please.
Well, sorry, I don't want to.
What about flyers? Can we use flyers?
That's cost.
Yeah, I think flyers is great. We could have our own social media page.
Right.
I mean,
You
we
could put the flyers up in the community houses,
I don't know.
parks, maybe.
Yeah.
Hopefully I can add a little something. So I had spoken to a representative from the city technology department, and they were looking at what the possibility of giving us a section on the independent police auditor's webpage, where we could start having some ownership to be able to provide communication that way. So they were exploring that, and I'm just waiting some follow-up. So as soon as I have that, I'll be sure to share, but we thought that might be a good avenue as a starting place for communication.
If I may, I agree, because I just wrote down some of the criterias and stipulations and, you know, like stakeholders. What in your mind, Ms. Lewis, are stakeholders? Because I guess what I want us to stay away from is we are a Citizens Police Oversight Review Board.
So all of those, excuse me, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. All those things that I named as stakeholders. So individuals, communities that provide space for persons, citizens, friends, family. I think I said we started with the warm market. So
yes,
we moved from there. And then, of course, examples of nonprofits would be, you know, House 330, the International Institute, the Organization for Asians. So East African Neighborhood Development Corp., all those places.
What would be their role, I guess, with the community engagement for this board? Because I guess I want to make sure that we don't become some kind of bureaucracy rather than a board than what we were elected by the citizens of Akron to be, a police oversight board. And I'm starting to feel a little bit like we're maybe, you know, we're taking on a lot and becoming more of a bureaucracy, and that's just how I'm starting to feel. And what Caitlin said, that brings me back to what Caitlin just said, which I appreciate that. Thank you. This is about our board. It's about police oversight, and we have to keep that in mind. Even when we're talking about bringing in community, we still have to keep that at the forefront of what our mission is, what we're doing here. You know, I'm starting to feel like we're becoming some kind of bureaucracy, and I'm probably wrong, and maybe I'm tired, I don't know.
I think that the police oversees the community, and I think that we've had people quite literally say to us within the last hour that they don't know us and don't trust us, and that the most important thing that we can do right now is to make ourselves available and to bring everybody along in the process.
I don't disagree with that.
So what I heard from Ms. Lewis was identifying stakeholders as just people who have interest in the community and finding ways. I didn't hear a solid plan. I heard an exploration and a narrative in terms of how do we engage all of the folks who intersect with people that we may not, on our everyday basis, that we may not be in touch with, and how do we create ways to tap into all these different pockets of the community to pull forward and gather the information to bring forward. And so that was just an observation. Another observation that's been made is that we don't have a centralized place to communicate and to put out information. I'm happy that the city has volunteered their webpage. I want us to be cautious maybe with, or just be realistic about maybe how responsive they may be with respect to all the other web pages that they're managing, and whether or not we consider creating our own website. We have the money, and that could be a potential problem to us, and then creating an independent server or an avenue for people to submit information to us that wouldn't go directly to some type of city-based entity. And so, and again, these are just some thoughts on what I'm hearing, but I really like the direction that you're going. Last night I had a conversation with Brantley, one of the professors over at the University of Akron School of Law, and he told me that one of the coolest things that we could possibly do is literally just come to the community and say, hey, this is what we're finding out. this is what we're learning, this is new information that we just got, and we want to share it with you. For no other purpose, we can talk about it, but we can't say it enough that, like, we gotta, yeah, I think it's being a dead.
I think one thing that we haven't talked about is that we have 13 council people, and they all have social media, and they're all in different wards, and that's the way to contact people in every ward for engagement.
So once again, we mentioned social media, and we mentioned flyers, and we mentioned public service announcements. So any other means by which we want to get the word out?
If I may, I agree with what Phil just said. Like, for example, my council person, she has a council meeting I believe it's the first or second Wednesday of every single month, and she has it in a different location within our ward. I'm in Ward 1. And it's always a lot of people there, and the police department is always invited to be there. There's always police officers there. And I've been to 2, and I just think it's an excellent way to engage with the police department, the people who serve us, serve and protect, or who are charged to serve and protect the community and the community. And if there's something else in that ward going on, you know, that the people need to know about, she contacts those people, and that's brought out. So I think what Phil said is if you're going to do that, to do it in each ward, however often you plan to do it, I think that's an excellent idea. Contact your ward council person first, and maybe go from there. And, I'm sorry, just one other point. The last one I went to, both that I went to, she always has I guess there's a commander for each area of town or something like that. They're always there, and they give a report on how many auto thefts, if any, how many break-ins in that community, if any. They give a full array of the things that have happened over the last month in that ward. And I just think that that's something to think about while you're thinking about putting together your community engagement. I mean, because we are trying to build bridges as well, right? Mm-hmm.
Any further comment, discussion? Anything else, Ms. Lewis?
I would like to hear from the other subcommittee persons if they have anything to add.
Okay. Yeah, once we get through our committees, I'll
I'm sorry, she wasn't on the mic.
There's someone in the public who makes a comment, but I'm gonna wait till we get through our committees, then we'll come back and allow that.
Are we talking to the budget committee?
Once again, keep in mind, this is our initial kind of look at what we want to do. So we do want to make sure that the citizens that we're attempting to engage are comfortable. So I don't want to make it overly political. I want to go where they are. That's part of outreach. Where are they? And so that's why I made sure that we talked about areas within the city that provide community and where people are comfortable. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, unless there's another committee report, I wonder if I could make, kind of circling back to notification about the governance meetings that we're going to have. I'd like to request, and maybe it's everybody on the board, but particularly the people that are, community engagement, but those that are more involved with that. If you could send me your thoughts about how we might communicate about these meetings. And I might have to get back to you to ask, would you mind helping implement? Because, you know, Phil's, Phil, I don't know how you're doing, all you're doing, but, you know, to ask him to, you know, to try to handle these communications, we can't. But I may ask you for some help, but please send me a message as soon as you've thought about it, about how might we communicate it out. I mean, just things that, you know, the council member idea, I think, you know, we can use the city. I'm going to send an email to the council members about this. You know, I don't know if we have media coverage here tonight or not, but, you know, nothing stops us from putting out press releases, you know, about it. And the media hopefully picks it up and discloses it. And then, you know, we've got lots of people we know who were involved in issue 10 in other ways with this committee already. And if you can kind of, anybody who sort of knows who ought we to be communicating with about our plans, and we'll nail down where they're going to be, when they're going to be, and so on. But please help out with this. I'll do a lot of the laboring stuff. I mean, I know how to do a press release, okay? But please give me your thoughts about it, and I may ask you to help me do it, okay?
Is everybody clear on what Mr. Gippen is asking?
Yes, if I might make another comment. I would like for you to strongly consider talking with starting with your council person who's in your, do you live in Akron?
Yeah, I'm going to send.
Yeah, I was strong.
Because we now got the city system, I can easily send them all an email.
Yeah, I think that I've spoken with more than one or two council members, and they've all said, we're willing to help this board get off the ground in any way we can, so let's use them.
Mr. Chair, do you have any protocols that you would like us to follow if we do want to have a public meeting, have the media there? Do you mind us going about that on our own? Do you want us to send you an email?
Yeah, I believe that I would want to know about it simply because any public meetings that we have and we have a quorum, we have to make it a public, and we have to give notice of that. So I would definitely like to know, but I do like the aspect of governance and also community engagement, someone working together, because I think, especially at the beginning, it kind of goes hand in hand. And I think, and I appreciate what you said, Mr. Gibbon, because I think we have to establish, and I'm not saying tonight, but we have to think about what is our plan moving forward, how we're going to conduct those with our community. So I appreciate that we're always saying it, but we do have to begin to establish a plan of how we're going to do that.
I agree. Is this just coming to you, or I would prefer, Mr. Gippen, and anyone else, if we are going to do something and we're looking to have the media there, if you can notify the entire board that this is happening. The approval to our chair first, and then once the approval is, I'm recommending that this is the process. The request goes to Mr. Chair. If he approves that, then it should be an email sent to all of us or a text message that this is happening, because essentially each subcommittee is a representation of all of us. Each person is a representation of all of us, and I want to make sure that we all have the opportunity to participate.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. Are you making a motion?
Just a suggestion.
Right.
Yet, not yet.
Well, I'd like to make what Ms. Reed just said a motion. I think that that's prudent. We are one cohesive, independent board, and one hand needs to know what the other hand is doing, even if both hands aren't involved. We still need to know about it, because we're a community, especially as community engagement gets started. We don't want someone coming up to us saying something about a meeting that was at a library, and one of us are like, well, I didn't know. It doesn't look good. It's not a good look. So I agree with what Ms. Reed said. At least we should all know that it's going to take place.
So there's a motion on the floor. Ms. Castle, do you mind reading the motion, please?
The motion on the floor is that we will notify Mr. Chair when subcommittee meetings are being held, and then we will notify all board members. Did I capture that correctly, Ms. Reed?
I think it has something to do with the media.
Yes, so essentially, the subcommittee's not so much, but if there is going to be a subcommittee meeting that's going to be open to the public, then it needs to be approved by Mr. Chair, and then we all need to be notified of the meeting, the time, the place, and the context, just to be sure that there's continuity in the meeting, and that it doesn't diverge from the purpose that was stated to all of us.
Especially if the meeting is being called, correct? Yeah.
Is there a second? Any further discussion? Roll call. Anaskevich?
Yes.
Gippin?
Yes.
Peoples?
Yes.
Lewis?
Abstain. I have some reservations about that.
Would you like to discuss?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Can I ask that the vote count be rescinded until we've heard further discussion from Ms. Lewis and others?
Mm-hmm.
So that rescinds the votes we cast.
Okay. So we have a motion, we have a second. We're rescinding it until Ms. Lewis is ready for further discussion. Am I understanding that correctly, Mr. Gifford?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
I second that.
Anything else from Community Engagement Subcommittee? All right, we're moving on to Budget and Finance Subcommittee. Mr. Costa?
Okay, so I have, so we have not met yet. Just gonna say, I've just received digital copies of the budget, the line item expenses, as well as the staff allocation, and been reviewing through those. I've reached out to the finance director because I've got some questions with respect to some of the things in the budget and how they may have been impacted as to where we are. And so, just gonna say, I'm meeting with the finance director next Wednesday at 4 o'clock. And I think that we had talked about having subcommittee meetings prior to when we meet, and that was kind of the I guess, latest time that was able to be requested. And obviously, everybody's more than welcome to come. That'll be kind of just an information gathering session, and to ask some questions with respect to the budget. And it is my intent also to bring forth, after touching bases with Mr. Gippin, a series of functions with respect to the Budget and Finance Committee. As I kind of alluded to earlier, I got a little bit distracted with looking into public domain, private website servers, and us getting the website and a budget, and then this whole laundry list of things that could be cool. And so I kind of need to reel it in a little bit, but that's where things are at. Everybody is more than welcome to join, and I will also send out the electronic copies of the budget, the line items, and the staff allocation that I received this evening, just so everybody has a copy of that and is aware of kind of where we're at, what's been allocated. But just a general update, because we do not have our deputy director, because we started a little bit earlier, and now because we're without an administrative assistant, and because I anticipate there's going to be some room in the budget to do some additional things, perhaps, especially depending on the timeline that it takes to fill those roles respectively, as the money was allocated for those salary and compensation. So let's not get carried away, but if there is something that we see and identify that we need, I think that we need not be overly conservative, especially if it's reasonable in terms of making us more effective in communicating with each other and the public, and just doing our jobs in general, that we look to make the investment. So that's where we're at. Again, high-level review. I will send out the budget and the electronic versions of the financials, and a meeting will take place next Wednesday at 4 p.m. Here in City Council. I need to figure out the exact location. I don't think we figured that out yet, but most likely the finance director's office or place, and everybody is more than welcome to join that. And I will report out on my additional findings next week too.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. As you stated before, we have those two openings, and I appreciate because I know you'll be working with Ms. Richards and Human Resources as far as what those things can look like as far as those two openings, and as we start looking at compensation. So appreciate you always thinking in that way.
And it goes back to get to communications in terms of where we're putting out these positions in terms of like where we're hiring. And I think that as we talk through tonight's meeting, it's becoming so much more important now as having a centralized place of communicating and storing information is just key. Because even as tonight when I was preparing for this meeting, I had to ask you, I was like, how do we find our live stream to actually like watch this? Because I was like, I should probably post this to my Facebook. And then ended up, not doing so because I couldn't actually find it.
Yeah.
So I think that should be a big priority, and that's something that I really want to invest time in terms of us figuring that out.
Any further questions or discussions for Mr. Costa?
Real quick, and I think the Budget and Finance Committee is just Bob and myself, so if anybody wants to.
I'm on the committee too.
Crunch some numbers. Are you as well too?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Me and Ms. Richards talked briefly last week after our meeting, and because the Human Resources and Finance Committee are hand in hand with budget, I'll do my best to be there. I'll probably be late. I don't end work till 4 o'clock, but I'll do my best to try to make as many meetings as I can.
The more the better.
I think as well, Mr. Costa, it will be good for us from a communication standpoint of where we're going to store. What I was told is that you're able to watch the live stream through the City of Akron's YouTube channel. That's where this is being live streamed at. And if that's not working or that's not happening, then yeah, there's another conversation we need to have about that for sure. So thank you. All right, if there's nothing further, we'll close out our subcommittee report outs, and we'll go to our public comment if there is one. And then we'll come back to item 4 on our agenda.
Hi, my name is Shakayla Jackson, and I'm here.
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time?
My name is Shakayla Jackson, and I'm here due to an incident with the police officers. So on April 24th of 2023 at approximately 7:53 p.m., myself and the passengers of our vehicle were sitting at the Circle K gas station on East Talmadge and North Main Street. 2 adults, 1 juvenile, and a minor child. I noticed that 5 police cars were pulling up and blocked us in. The officers proceeded to come towards us yelling, "Get out of the car." When we asked why, we were just told to get out. And when we didn't, an officer reached in the vehicle and unlocked the doors at that point. They pulled me and the passengers out of the car with no explanation as to why, even though we asked several times. Then we were placed in handcuffs and driven around for 3 hours in those handcuffs. I was taken to 4 different locations. Our names weren't asked until I was given an unnecessary seatbelt ticket. How are we as a community supposed to build trust with these officers that feel the need to kidnap or go rogue per se? The citizens who they are supposed to protect and serve, they're not. They literally have people backing them and protecting them. And majorly, we aren't the problem. They're the aggressors. I'm a woman and a mother who doesn't feel safe in police presence. It shouldn't be like this. When or how will this change? Do you need me to go over it again?
Ma'am, did you make a complaint?
Yes, ma'am, I did. I have spoke with several people, including the NAACP. That's the reason I'm here today. I was given the advice to come here.
Okay, did you make a complaint with the police auditor?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay.
Mrs. Jackson did file a complaint with the auditor's office. It's been forwarded to the police department for an investigation. A little bit ago, I had a conversation with the deputy chief. Most of you know, the police department a couple of months ago went on 4 10-hour days. And I am having a tremendous hard time getting information. And she sent some pictures, some video, so I know there's Akron police officers involved, but I don't know who, I don't know if there's body camera footage or not, because I can only get that information from patrol operations. Ever since the ruling on Dale and Walker, they've been working out of the command center, I think it's called. So it's a very, very slow process, and I'm hoping this ends soon, because I've got 6 or 7 cases pending that I can't get information on right now.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question? When we had our training, I just want to get clarity. Whenever there's a direct encounter with a citizen, the body cam is supposed to be activated. Is that correct?
It's related to a call for service. I mean, if you're walking into a restaurant to order, no, you need to have it on then. But if you're at a call, in that instance, yes, there should be time.
And it only depends on whether or not that particular division has to use a body camera. In other words, our SWAT team, not SWAT, SNUT units don't use that, and these are traffic stops in police cars with police officers in uniform. They should be recorded, but they're not even equipped with those yet. So that's why I said I've got to find all this material to find out exactly what happened, when it happened. Just going by what she sent me, I know that APD is involved, but I don't know how yet.
So, first of all, let me say this. Thank you very much, first of all. And I'm remorseful that that happened to you, because that should not happen. And what you just said, Mr. Young, this is what I mean by looking at policies from a body camera perspective. And again, I don't know if that's in a collective bargaining agreement or not, or if that's something that we can go in, but these are things from a policy perspective that we have to be able to look at and make recommendations for change. And this is why, for us, and just so everybody from the public knows, for us, it's very important that we get public comment. That's why we put it towards the top of our agenda before we do any business, because being able to hear from you first after we have to do roll call and approve minutes, the public is the first thing on our agenda. And so just know that for moving forward, like we do that at the very beginning. And so if there's a way that we can, is there any way, and maybe this is not a question for you, Mr. Young, and Deputy Chief Hart, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I do want to ask a question. Like for something like this, how do we help to expedite this process so we can get some understanding, so that we can do our due diligence and investigate this complaint?
If Mr. Young has an issue with what's going on with John that's there, he's welcome to reach out to your commanding officer and let me know. Let me know about this one when I sat down.
Okay.
They both work. I will say that one of them, if not both, have been doing some additional roles during times of protests that are some of there. But they should be back within 4 or 5 days. They should let me know.
Okay.
What that could be, depending on what happened, is they may have to look to determine, do we have a call for service that, so it could be a couple hours of work on their part to find out. It could be 2 minutes.
Yep.
It just depends on the detail of what we're doing, but absolutely they will get back to me.
Okay.
If there's not, we'll make sure that happens.
Thank you.
It's never 2 minutes, it's more like 2 hours. I mean, it generates a lot of phone calls to a lot of different people. I think Mrs. Jackson and I, when she told me this story, probably talked an hour. And then I told her to send me an email, and she sent me 3 emails, one with the pictures, one with the complaint, and I can't remember what the other one was.
I didn't need 2 minutes.
So,
Yeah, I got you.
Mr. Young, do we know who the officers are who accosted this lady?
No, I have no information whatsoever other than what she sent me, because we're just backed up, and I have to get all my information from the 2 officers in patrol operations. One, you met Sergeant Beck, he handles the complaints, and then there's Sergeant Spano that handles the use of force. We're really going to be at a disadvantage here in about 3 or 4 days because Sergeant Beck is going on baby leave, and I don't know that he's going to be replaced. And although those 2 sergeants work well together, I don't know that they know the intertwine of what each of them do. So it's going to be a big disadvantage now trying to find out about citizen complaints when Sergeant Beck leaves.
I guess I should have been more clear. Did the young lady, did she give you like badge numbers and names of the officers? That was, I guess I should have been more
They're not wearing name tags,
sincere.
are they?
No, they still don't wear name tags, so.
Mr.
you
Chair,
can't-
Mr. Chair, may I say something, please? We skipped one thing. I wanted to ask Ms. Jackson if you don't mind coming to the podium so everybody can hear you and so the public can hear you. So in taking your pictures, the majority of the police officers do not have their badge on. Case in point, the officer last Wednesday did not have his badge on, so how is she, hopefully with the pictures, he can be identified, but when are they going to be wearing their badges? They've been given permission not to wear their badges? Is that what's going on? Because the police officer didn't have his badge on, and I've seen some of them within the community, and they don't have their badges on. Can we
You
address
mean
that?
their nameplate, their name?
Yeah, right,
Okay.
so that, no, their badge.
Are you asking this
With the
question to
number.
Deputy Chief Hardy?
I want to ask her,
Okay.
Ms. Jackson, if in fact an officer that accosted you, arrested you, had his badge on, his or her badge on.
I don't recall seeing badges, but I can tell you for sure no one ever turned on a body camera. And I also called down for a police report. They gave me a police report number that is not real. It doesn't go to anything. I have that email as well.
Did you get a cruiser number?
I got my
Mr. Chair,
minor's cruiser number 9. We also asked for a supervisor. We were told that he would meet with us if he felt like it.
And
Ms.
so,
Staniscavich, hold on one second. Go ahead.
so my other issue is how can citizens make a legitimate complaint if they don't know who the officer is? What the officer's name is, what the badge number is, that's what's going on.
Those complaints come through me, and that's why I said I have to go through and do all the investigation to find
Absolutely.
out the day, the time, the place. This happened at a Circle K. I'm interested in the video that
Right.
may be available from Circle K, not
Hopefully.
APD.
Hopefully.
Yes.
Because these gas station videos, sometimes they have video, sometimes they don't, and sometimes it's grainy. So the onus should not be on the citizen. It should be both and. And then how can
Absolutely.
they make a legitimate complaint if they don't know who the officer is?
if I may, I'm not saying that the onus was on the citizen. I was just asking if she got the card number. But the police department, you know, they should know through their dispatch, they should know who the officers are, what car number it is, what time of day it is, and what vicinity they were in. The police department makes, they have recordings. They still record every call. If they called in for the stop, if they stopped them, they should have called in to dispatch and said, we have stopped, you know, citizens in whatever car. So they have a record. We know who they are, right? Is that correct? No, I'm asking Mr. Harden, you should know who those officers are based on those demographics. Is that correct?
Our officers should have their badges on and their ID numbers on
But the,
Additionally, if they call out on the radio, that creates a call card, and we have to look that up. That's why I said that could take 2 minutes. If it's quick and easy, we have a really good time. If we don't, it may take longer.
okay. But there's no way, there is a way to find out who those officers are. That's what I'm trying to, I want you to feel comfortable about that. There's a way to find out exactly who those officers were based on the day, the time, where it occurred, and what car number they were in,
Can
okay?
I say something on that comment?
Yes.
There wasn't a call. We were getting drone watched. The police were on a building by the Family Dollar, behind the Popeyes, drone watching us.
Well, I would think that those drones, I don't know much about drones. Do they have video on the drones? Okay, so that's still, believe me, they can track everything every officer does at every moment of every single day.
So
It should be tracked through the police department.
Yeah.
But this is why we need training from you.
Ms. Anastasia, what I want to do is, yeah, we know that things should be done. I think the reason why we're here is because maybe some of these things aren't being done. And so we have to present, as we have these public comments, and I appreciate what you're doing. You're trying to add comfort, but sometimes sometimes it may not come across as that. So, Ms. Jackson, we're not here to make you feel like this is going to be okay. What we have to do is, and this is what I'm going to ask Mr. Young. Mr. Young, when is a realistic time that we're going to be able to follow back up with Mr. Jackson?
As soon as I can get the information, I can give a report back on this case next Wednesday when we have our next meeting.
And you're going to get back with, so that means you'll get back to Ms. Jackson before next Wednesday?
If I can get the information. I have to find out a lot of things. I probably am going to have to order body camera footage, and then...
And what's that process look like?
The body camera footage I ordered for an incident last week, I just got yesterday. So it usually only takes a day, day and a half, but it's been because of, I guess, this decision and them working out of their command center. There was nobody there that I send this to that then forwards it on. So usually, during normal situations and circumstances, it's not a very long period. Within 2 or 3 days, I know what happened. With this one, I hope it will be the same. I talked to her this morning at about 7:30 in the morning?
Yes, sir.
And basically, she sent me the emails. They were forwarded to APD to start their investigation before I even know if there's body camera. One thing I always do is I order body camera footage, whether or not they have it or not, to show that, hey, this is a case, and body camera footage needs to be there, and your units aren't wearing body cameras, so this is another reason why they should be.
Yep. Ms. Jackson, may I ask you a question?
Yes.
What was the complaint process like for you? Was it cumbersome? Was it accessible?
It was, you talking about to make the complaint?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it went really smooth. The only issue I had is the formal complaint form. When you're filling out your description, it erases it all. So you have to send it in a formal email complaint form. You can only fill out your name and basic information on the form. I tried to put a description in 4 times and it deleted it every time.
Okay. And I know you wasn't here earlier to hear some of the public comment regarding the complaint and making it a little bit more accessible. How do we make it better?
Actually, when I did the email, when I spoke with Mr. Young, that was the best it could do, to have a person on the phone, because he took my complaint no matter what, even if it didn't go through on the form. He was excellent at what he did. He instantly got on it. So that is actually great to have that actual person engagement, because talking to a robot or just filling out a form really doesn't get you anywhere most of the time because it's too much red tape. Mm-hmm. So he really did step up to the plate this morning, and he got on it very quickly.
I appreciate that. Ms. Lewis, did you have something? Ms. Reed?
I just wanted to clarify, you said you saw them watching from behind the Family Dollar near the Popeyes.
It was on top of the towers. It's a Family Dollar, and then it's some senior citizen towers off to your right. We saw him, and then when he realized we saw him, he dropped down but flew the drone over, because the police drone actually fell on the ground, and he had to start reflying it again. We looked at it.
The reason I wanted to inquire about drone footage, we've been talking about body cams. Have you requested drone footage as well?
I don't know anything about this case. First of all, I need the report numbers, who the officers were involved. You have to do all that to get body camera footage. I just can't say, hey, an incident happened at Circle K, send me everything. It has to be a day, a time. what this was, and then I talked to the sergeants, and they give me a little bit about what's on the report, what the stop was made. Sometimes, a lot of times, this information doesn't, I shouldn't say a lot of times, depending upon whether or not it's the narcotics team or the SNUD unit. Mr. Costa asked a question why our numbers were different a few weeks ago in training, and it's because they don't report their activity. You heard Sergeant Beck say that the deputy chief is changing that and everything is up to snuff now. I haven't checked into it that closely to see if it's there, but I get phone calls from people that say the police are running through my yard, what's going on? And I call in the dispatcher, say, well, maybe it's this unit or that unit. They never call in and tell us where they're at.
And just for some clarity, you mentioned you had requested the body camera footage for Ms. Jackson's complaint.
No,
Or not yet?
Not yet. As soon as I can get that information, I talked to the sergeant this afternoon, but I had 2 other cases that I had to get information on, and I told him, and I just sent him her complaint. So that'll be something on my agenda for tomorrow. There's just so many cases. If you look at that report, which we'll get into, 96 calls just since, I think it's March 27th.
Just wanted to request that if we can also get that drone footage, if that can be requested as well.
I don't think there is any drone footage that's recorded. I don't even know where this drone came from. I know the fire department has drones. You have them. It's not recorded. It's not. It is recorded now since when?
They drone us every time.
Do we even know that if they had their body cameras on? Did they have them on?
Not at the stop.
We don't know until I get the information.
Okay, so there's no footage. if
Because
they
if
didn't
this
have
is
them
the SNUD unit, they don't wear body cameras, so there's no footage of this, other than what she sent me.
So I just wanted to, it sounds like there's some other elements of surveillance that the police department is using. And I think it's just an added way in the event that they did not have on their body cams. We can go ahead and request, if possible, that drone footage, because she mentioned the drone fell on the ground.
It did. It fell
And that
right
just, it
close
had
to
been
the
watching.
kick.
Do we know that those drones belong to the police? Do we know if they did? Because I know private citizens.
I don't know about this incident.
Okay,
We have a drone we use, OSP had a drone initially, there's several members of the community flying drones.
that's why I'm asking, because there are people, everyday citizens who have drones in the community flying over people's homes. If they see the police stop someone, they'll have a drone flying over that. That's why I'm asking, do we know for sure if the drone was a police drone or not?
We saw them on top
If
of the
I
building,
can,
and they left it hovering.
hold, 1 second, 1 second. Let's get back on target for 1 second. Mr. Young is gonna, he's already started the investigation. So we're gonna allow that process to happen. Our hope, Ms. Jackson, is that Mr. Young is able to get back to you, if not by the end of this week, the first of next week.
Okay.
And we'll look forward to hearing Mr. Young's report out next Wednesday at our meeting.
Okay.
Okay? So Ms. Jackson, thank you so much.
Thank you for hearing me.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, could I just add maybe the last comment, but to some extent, and Ms. Jackson, we appreciate what you've done to come here and talk with us, but I take heart from the fact that, Mr. Young, and no surprise, is beginning to investigate it, and as rigorously as he can. And I know this is a larger question we're going to be talking about probably for weeks to come, if not months. But to me, this reinforces why we need to have an independent investigative process that leads to an independent conclusion, and not just review what the police may in the end determine about this incident, for just lots of reasons. But I think we're making a good start on it. But for me, just this, what's happened here as described, reinforces that we need to be able to reassure the community that if they make a complaint to us, it will be investigated independently, and we will report our findings independently.
Thank you, Mr. Gippert.
If I may,
One thing, what he just said violates the CBA. You
Yes.
cannot do that.
Phil, I disagree with you.
Hey,
but that's-
listen, listen. This is why we're going to read the rules, and we're going to amend what we need to amend as a board. This is exactly why we're having this conversation, okay? So we're going to amend. I want to move into your report, because this is a perfect time for us to move into your report. Mr. Costa, do you have something to add?
Incredibly quickly, I know that we just added pieces of paper where people could sign in if we got a public comment. It seems like people are coming here to bring forth their encounters, and so I would just suggest that maybe we add a little line on that piece of paper as to would you like this comment to constitute a complaint?
Thank you, Mr. Costa.
Can I?
Please.
I have something to add before we go to, based on what Mr. Gippen said and what's gone on these last 15 minutes, and I know I'm skipping ahead, but I believe that as a board, we need to have some type of training with Mr. Young.
Okay, let's not go ahead. Let's hear his,
Okay.
because that's new business. So let's go, Mr. Young, if you can give your report out. Please, we're going back to agenda item number 4 before we go into agenda item 6, which is new business.
Great, great. All of you should have received a copy. I sent it out. My copier's broken, so I can't make copies, and we need to order a new copy. Everything is written up just like the report that I gave you, the use of force report on what we receive in every month. Probably the only thing that this report doesn't show is the volume of calls and the time it takes. And I don't want to use the word investigate, but to look into things such as Mrs. Jackson's issue. I have to have everything so that when the department does their investigation, then I have the information to look and see and make sure that they did a thorough, fair, and objective investigation on Mrs. Jackson's allegations. So if you look at this report, if there's something that you don't understand, but this is the same way we write out our yearly report. We tell you, Mrs. Anna, say it again,
Anna Skevich.
Anna Stevich said to me a little while ago, what is UOF? That's use of force. So it tells you how many are coming in that are coming in through our office, how many the police department's getting, as well as the use of force cases. I'm still backed up in the 60s on use of force cases. For some reason, all these things that happened in 2022, I didn't receive until at least January the 11th. And I'm still backed up on basically a lot of last year's product. So is there any questions on this report? Anything anybody that they don't understand? Because I want to get into something else real quick.
So the 60 that are backed up that you're mentioning, Mr. Young, why is that?
Because I haven't received, I can't get information from the police department on where these happened, how they happened, whether there's a report, whether there's body camera footage. You know, one of them is a traffic crash, who I asked one of the members to look at before we started tonight. So there's things that I have to get information before we can say, and I don't like to jump in and say, everything that's here is wrong until I get all the information. We don't know what happened, why it happened, who did it, but we have to make some sense of this, and if it doesn't, then I go to Deputy Chief Harding and write it up and tell him, hey, I disagree with this, or Deputy Chief Leeser, or directly to the chief, and express my disappointment or objections to what happened in this investigation.
Mr. Chair, may I speak? I just want to ask a quick question to Deputy Hardin. What can we do to expedite this process?
I have some questions for this. I don't know that I understand what he said.
Okay.
I don't want to take up your time on that, but I'd like to have an opportunity to go with
Because I'm concerned that our community members are looking for answers. They're going to lose trust in us because of the timelines that they have, the expectations they have, versus things that are completely out of our control. And
If you remember in our training, the department said the turnaround for complaints is 30 days. So the department has 30 days from the time this complaint is given to a supervisor to investigate. In other words, they got to find out who the supervisor was. So if he or she is off the next 2 or 3 days, they won't get this complaint until Friday or maybe even next Monday to start the investigation, and then that starts the 30-day. I need to know what's going on so that I know what they're going forward with. In other words, is there even going to be an investigation? You know, I don't know yet until I get all that information.
I have a very quick question for Deputy Harding. At what point in the interaction with the community member, or I guess whatever, at what point is like a report number or an interaction number like generated?
So we'll always have a CAD number. Every incident that's dispatched will get a CAD number. If an officer writes an additional case, they'll get a case number. If there's a crime alleged, if they just want to come out and talk about an issue with a neighbor that may not generate any police action, they'll still have a CAD number, which are computer-aided dispatch number. So we would always have that. It's just, there may be different places we need to look, a different database that's stored in.
Okay, so for instance, if me and Ms. Marie got into an incident, you guys were called to investigate. That would never happen because she's awesome. But if you were called to investigate, at what point in that interaction, is it as you're leaving? Is it at what point is the number generated? Because I'm starting to wonder whether or not it's possible for some type of, you know, officer business card with the actual interaction number to be given to a person as they're interacting, so they have some type of so they have something that they can
If it's dispatched or entered in our computer, if it's called, like somebody called about that argument we gave there would immediately be a number associated with the dispatch.
Okay.
And that's in our computer dispatch system. That even gets the officer, the dispatcher enters the information, sends notes, it goes to the officer in a patrol car, they would get it. If they came out and there was no criminal activity associated, or maybe you guys were just, you weren't, if there was a family relationship or domestic, then there may be no report generated. If there was allegations, if it would be criminal in nature, there would be a report generated, so the officer would then pull additional number as well, and then that would cause them to go back and have to enter the notes of what occurred, or the allegations into that report number. And then that's information that we would provide to the complaining party or the victim. And then there's 50 more reports that could go based on the rest of that story.
Sure. No, thank you. I'm curious.
Sure.
And that's the information that I need to receive, whether or not there were additional reports or just a CAD number and maybe I guess a log entry on we responded, this happened or whatever.
And if the officer goes out on that and it's patrol, which our patrol has a body on camera, then that auto tags that report number or that CAD number becomes part of their body on camera. That's how we use it to look it up.
Can you, what's a CAD number? What is that? What's the acronym for that? CAD number, what's CAD?
Computer-aided dispatch.
Okay, thank you.
So, one second before you move on, Mr. Young, I know Deputy Chief Harding, you said you would like to talk to Mr. Young kind of outside because it's too long to get into this. I'd love to make a suggestion that along with that conversation, can we have our Vice Chair, Mr. Gipton, be a part of that conversation? Sure. Would that be okay with you, Mr. Gipton? Yes, sir. Ms. Aniskevich?
Yes.
Okay. Just from a governance perspective, I think it's going to be good for you to hear, be a part, and to listen to that conversation.
I'll appreciate that. That will inform, I think, as we start.
Yeah, absolutely. So I appreciate that. So if after, once we get offline and adjourn, if the 3 of you, 4 of you kind of get together and schedule that, I think that will be helpful for us all as we move forward. Mr. Young?
Next, I'd like to talk about the public comment that was made last week about Sergeant Oko. Did I pronounce that right? I don't know if you remember, but someone said that Sergeant Oko had lied in court and that the case was dismissed. Does everyone remember that? I've done some looking into that. It's, the deputy chief and I talked about it earlier. I know that there's not an investigation going on, and I've heard a couple of different things. One was that there was some evidence suppressed in this particular case, and the sergeant mentioned suppressed evidence, and this has to do with, I think his name's Jacob Blake. That was his case. So that's what I'm still looking into. And these things take a lot of time because right now I talked to Internal Affairs. There was nothing there. Yes.
I believe the gentleman was Jacob Blake's father, not
Yes,
Jacob Blake.
I'm sorry.
It's
Jacob
okay.
Blake's father. So it takes a little bit of looking into, but right now I haven't found anything about that's, and we can't even, we don't know yet what court it was, so I can look at the court documents to find out what judge it was to see exactly what happened in this.
To just give some clarity, it's Jacob Blake and Jacob Blake Sr. And so they have the same name, and it's Jacob Blake Sr. that we're referring to.
And I guess there's, according to the person I talked to today, there's no pending cases for Jacob Blake Sr., so I don't know if that case was dismissed or what. A lot of times when officers do that, it's basically, what do they call it? For the trial, a mistrial. But this, you know, I'm still checking into that. I think that was someone said, I even received a call, I think yesterday or the day before, from a citizen from Wisconsin that was, had information on this. So I'm looking into it, but it's something, these cases, you know, it can tie me up for like a half a day, just trying to find out, talking to different departments, the court and everything else. So I will, as we get that information, just like Mrs. Jackson, I will report back to you on what happened.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Is that the completion of your report?
Yes.
Okay.
And I need to run to the restroom.
All right. Appreciate that. Want to move into agenda item number 6, new business. I know Ms. Anaskevich, you had some new business that you want to discuss. You can proceed at this time.
Yes, well, luckily, a lot of the other things under number 1 has already been discussed, so I'm good with that. One thing that I think is important for us, we've had a retreat with, several retreats, 2 retreats with the police department. We have had one with the law department. I think we need to have a real succinct training with Mr. Young. We need to carve out some time to have a training. Like a lot of the things that have come out tonight about what he did, how he did it, how he got his complaint, and we don't know. We're finding out by happenstance through different meetings that we have, and if something comes up or a citizen makes a complaint, we need to have a training with just Mr. Young so that we know exactly what his routine is when a complaint comes in and what's the process of that complaint from the police or from the citizen about the police, what that process is from the time it comes in to him and where it goes from there, so that we all have a good understanding of what our auditor does and what he has to contend with and how he has to contend with it, so that when we have these issues come up, we have a little bit more knowledge. I don't see any reason for us not to have a training with him. It doesn't have to be all day. It doesn't have to be 2 or 3 weeks in a row, but we have to have some type of succinct training with Mr. Young and Mr. Young only, so that he can tell us everything he feels we need to know as a Police Citizens Review Board, including the process that he goes through, so that we know. And then we can move on from there instead of helter-skeltering through this with him, like, well, what does You know, what do you do then, and what do you do then? You know, if they say this, what do you say then? Then we know.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, and I would say it's not helter-skelter as much as looking for understanding as to his process, and so I think that's why the questions are appropriate that we ask. It's just looking for understanding.
I'm not saying they're not, I'm not saying they're inappropriate. I'm saying,
I didn't say you said it was
Okay.
inappropriate.
Yeah,
I
we
just
need the
said
training with him.
And I don't disagree with you, but when you made the statement of helter-skelter, I just think it's more of understanding the process. Mr. Costa?
I agree. I think, and obviously, that's all of us, we need to give public notice, but when we go this route, let's get a big space, and let's invite the community to come along as well, too, so we're all being educated at the same time, because it sounds like complaint processes, or the job that Phil does is not fully understood. If we don't get it, then how can we expect the community to get it? So, that's my only thought.
Mr. Chair, I completely agree. I think it would be good to be open to the public, because what I heard today is that the turnaround is probably close to more like 60 days from the time it gets to through all the channels that it's supposed to go to. And I think it's best, as Mr. Costa said, for the community to understand realistic expectations of what the turnaround time would look like. Also, if I may add, this is not something that needs to be done right away. It would be nice if we all had access to the portal that complaints come through. If we were able to actually see, all of us had access to a portal of complaints. The reason I say that is just to be aware, if someone came to you and, you know, told you something on the street, we told them the portal, we could check. Of course, we could also have Mr. Young do that, but just hypothetically, if we could have access to the portal of citizens' complaints, I think that would be useful.
Mr. Young, what we were talking about while you were out of the room is you leading us in a training as far as your responsibility and the process that you go through. Could you give us some type of an estimate of maybe the longevity of that training and what that would look like? Because we do want to invite the public into that as well, because that would serve for us as a public meeting.
The public has always been invited to my office to see, and I know there's people in here right now that have been there to see how things work. In the very beginning, I sent all of you an email that asked if you'd like to meet and come to my office. I think there was 2 or 3 of you that did come in. I think that's a very valuable tool, that you see how this machine rolls along and how it works, how we get things, how we ship things out, how long it takes for them to give us some type of reply back. You know, I'm not involved in the investigative process. So we have something that, you know, we were talking about how we could check to see where a complaint is. It's called the IA Pro system. And the IA Pro system has been around for what, 7, 8, 9 years? 7, 8 years?
Probably 6 or 7.
6 or 7 years. It's a early warning system that all the investigations go through this blue team, it's called. When we first got that system, they told me that I would have access. I went through all the training, and then they changed and said, no, you can't have access. Because right now, if I need to find out where we are in an investigation, I have to call the 2 sergeants in patrol operation. They have to look it up and call me back. And then they have to read and say, well, it went here, it got kicked back, or whatever. So we have that right now, but it's, if they're not giving it to me, they're not giving it to the board.
So Mr. Young, how long would a training with you take?
Yeah,
No more than an hour or 2, just to see.
So essentially, we could do that during a meeting when you do a report out. It could be you taking us through that step process.
Yes.
Even if it takes 90 minutes to 2 hours.
Right,
Okay.
it can be.
Thank you. Ms. Reed?
I was just going to reiterate, I wanted clarity on how long it would take as
Yeah.
well.
Thank you. Any other
So when do you think we could get that training from you?
Oh, that could be, that could be next week.
That's what I was thinking.
Yes, it can be next week. I'm just kind of thinking that it might be better to do 2 or 3 people at a time rather than everyone together, and then with all the questions, it runs to 4 hours. But I think 2 or 3 people at a time. But if you all want to meet as a group, we can do that.
Well, I think what comments that have made is we felt like it was important to do in this forum because the community's here, so that they know and understand that process as well.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, just based, and Phil was very kind. I did spend time with him early on. It was very useful. I mean, you know, and I think we all should be exposed to it. And I think we did spend 4 hours, Phil, and usefully. You know, so I think it's going to be more productive if we have a retreat, as sort of was initially Ms. Anakevich's idea, and set a separate time as a public meeting, but allow 4 hours, because I think it really will be that with all the discussion. There's a lot to talk about.
So, Mr. Gippen, are you suggesting that we allow the 4-hour allotment and invite the public, or not?
Yeah, I'm saying set a separate time, some time, and it's got to be a public meeting. I think it's going to be much better, I mean, Mr. Young, I think if we're all hearing it at the same time, much better than 2 or 3 different times. Okay. But I'm saying do it, don't try to do it in one of our Wednesday meetings, but find a time, maybe it's a Saturday, but do it, but really allow 4 hours, I think, or it may even be more than that. But there's an awful lot to talk about once I think Phil begins to explain it.
Can I say, okay, can I say this is what was in my mind as a training. We had a 3-hour training with the law department. We had 2 4-hour trainings with the police department. I'm saying the same, and we had those trainings in replacement of our regular board meeting. At least the police trainings were. Can we do the same thing with Phil? Because that way we all get an understanding all at the same time as to how his work goes, the process of his work. That way we all have an understanding at the same time, and otherwise we're going to be back to where we are tonight. Well, Mr. Young, how does this go? Mr. Young, how does that go? And I just think that if we just have a training with him, you know, then we'll get a lot of our answers, a lot of our questions answered all at the same time. And so when someone from the public, like tonight, comes up, then we'll have a better understanding as to how some of these things go. And we can engage with them in a more cohesive way. That's just my opinion.
Ms. Anaskevich, I just want to clarify, what are some of the differences between your suggestion and Mr. Gippens? Mr. Gippens sounds like he's saying do it outside of a meeting. Are you saying you want to do it inside of a meeting?
No, I'm saying no, okay. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying we can do it, when we had our training with the police, that was outside of these chambers. It was at the police training facility. I'm saying to do this, we can have a meeting with Mr. Young in the same fashion somewhere. That's what I'm saying.
And 2, I think, to go along, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Costa, he's saying doing it in a space that's big enough because it will serve as a public meeting to where we can invite the public. Because that's what it becomes if we're all there. That's just the sunshine law.
When we had the training with the police department, was that part of the sunshine?
We weren't discussing policy. And I would have to think that if he's training us, we're probably going to have thoughts about what we would want to see changed, and we will be discussing action. And so that's why we would make it. And regardless if we wasn't or not, I think to Mr. Costa's point, you can talk about this, Mr. Costa, better than I can because you brought it up. But the bringing the public in to understand the process will be helpful. I think, is that the point you're trying to make, Mr. Costa? And so I'm fine with that. I think that's a good thing.
It absolutely would be helpful, but we need to know we need to know first from him what the process is. It's
not mutually exclusive. I'm sorry. It's not mutually exclusive. We can do both. We can do both. It's okay. We can all learn together.
Okay.
And we can take a Wednesday or a time to do that. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all. And maybe that's just my perspective, but And if we need a follow-up session to get more detailed in the weeds, then we could completely schedule that. But I think that'd be a great way for us to spend a Wednesday evening.
Okay, I don't have a problem with that, but he'll have the floor, right, just so he can
Yes,
start.
Mr. Peoples?
I would like to make a motion to have this training in duration 4 hours on a Wednesday evening with Mr. Young.
Make a second. Because essentially, I just want to add one sentence. Essentially, that could be next Wednesday. Because the beautiful thing is, because we do have subcommittees, business is still getting done and business is still happening. Like, nothing has stopped moving. And so if we have to allot the time, I think it's worth the time that we allotted.
Next Wednesday would be fine.
Okay.
I
The sooner
agree.
the better.
Yep.
And Ms.
Sooner the
Richards,
better.
she'll be back. Not Ms.
Awesome.
You're Ms. Richards.
Yeah.
Can we just ask Mr. Young if that's a feasible timeline? Because he mentioned how he's backed up, he's working on these cases. I want to make sure we're respecting his current workflow and what he has on his plate. Do you think that training, offering that next week, is that a feasible timeline for you? Or would you like, what would be beneficial for you?
I think that's okay now. One thing we might want to consider is that we're talking about use of force and citizen complaints. We might want to break that down into 2 sessions so that we can take care of regular business and then maybe hear about the complaint process next week and then the use of force process the following week, or vice versa.
Mr. Young, are you saying that you feel we need 8 hours to get a full understanding of the process?
No. We could, it's going to be a 4-hour training, maybe 2 next Wednesday and 2 the following Wednesday.
That sounds good to me. Thank you.
All right, any further discussion? All right. Roll call, Anaskevich.
Yes.
Gippin.
Yes.
Peoples.
Yes.
Lewis.
Yes.
Castle.
Yes.
Costa.
Yes.
Reed.
Yes.
Boyd, yes. Thank you. Any other new business?
Yes, I'd like to address number 4. I just need clarification, I guess. Discuss the purpose for and/or risk involved in bringing in individuals from the community as part of the board subcommittee. I just wanted to know if there are going to be any risks involved in that, or if there going to be any type of vetting process involved in that, depending upon what subcommittee the individual or individuals are being brought in on. And will those individuals need to be approved by the entire body, or will they only need to be approved by the chair and members of that particular subcommittee?
If I remember correctly, when we discussed this last week, we talked about, and I believe, Mr. Costa, it might have came from you, we talked about if first of all, we said that we wanted to involve the community or citizens on our subcommittees, and the process that we would go about doing that would be to take resumes, and that everybody who is wanting to be a part of those, it will have to go through a vote of the board. I believe we talked about that last week. If please, somebody. Okay.
I don't recall. I remember asking, were we going to ask for resumes, but I don't remember any conversation beyond that.
Mr. Chairman, I have the same memory of it, for what that's worth.
And so would you like us to formalize that with a motion of what that process would look like? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, I would like that, because, as much as we would like to think differently, there are some people in the community who do not approve of our board. So we want to make sure that if someone wants to engage in our board with us, that there's someone who has the same objectives that we have.
Mr. Chair, I have a question to Mr. Costa, if you could elaborate, now that you brought this up. Because there's a difference between the public being allowed to be a part of subcommittees and being present during a subcommittee. because you and Mr. Gippen, for instance, are wanting to invite the public to be a part of it, but that is not them being on the subcommittee, right? And so is there a difference? Can you open the subcommittee up to the public, and/or do you have to be vetted and on the subcommittee? So basically, if you are a member of the public, do you guys have to choose who's going to be present for the subcommittee meetings, or is it just open to the general public?
So I think whether or not the subcommittee meetings are open to the general public may fall to the number of members that we actually have that are involved in that subcommittee, and whether or not it's going to be subject to considered a public meeting. But I was advocating for community members being actual members of the subcommittee. And so, and perhaps the distinction is, you know, them being included on all correspondences, them receiving copies of documents that are being worked on, them being a part of the process, no different than how, you know, how you all sent out or all met at your subcommittee meeting. I don't think we fully fleshed out the process, and I think that there is kind of a competing timeline between the governance committee putting forth actual rules and procedures which would speak to the subcommittee process, and us actually trying to clarify what exactly we meant by that. And I hope I didn't confuse anybody in going through that.
Not at all. If we look at the minutes, there was a motion made by the chair that subcommittees may include community members. It was seconded by Mr. Gippen. I'm sorry. It was moved by Mr. Gippen, seconded by Mr. Costa, and it was a 9-0 vote yes. And so I think, to your point, Mr. Costa, this would fall under the governance subcommittee as far as the process of what that could look like. I know that we talked about the reviewing or the submission of resume from those who want to serve on subcommittees, and also the possibility of that subcommittee interviewing potential community members that will be on the subcommittee, and then that subcommittee chair brings it to the board. I remember that being discussed last week.
Okay.
And so, I'll look to you, Mr. Gippen, from a standpoint of some of our governors. Does that fall in anything? And it sounds like it becomes a 3-step process, essentially.
Yeah, I think actually that's when we ought to add, probably that's one we need to add.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, where is that motion? I was looking for
it's right here under the,
Oh, I'm missing a page. Got it, okay. Got it.
come on, Mr. Gippen.
It's late, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
no doubt.
But I think that, you know, it was only discussed, you know, what we're talking about. It obviously it is not part of the motion, but yeah, we'll add that to the list
Yeah.
of things to bring back as procedures.
Absolutely. And I think that's what we talked about. We just voted that we wanted to allow that.
Yeah.
And I think we actually said, hey, this is what the process could look like. And I believe it was those 3 steps that we discussed, but we didn't put it down in stone and make a motion on that. So is it fair to say, Mr. Gippen, that possibly next week we can have maybe something in stone? I know it sounds like it's rushed, but to me, it just becomes those 3 steps.
I would hope so, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion with that from anyone?
No, thank you all.
Yes.
I think that's important. We need to know who we're engaging with. I just think that that's prudent. And just a small little detail, the last letter of my name is a Z, not an S. That's okay. It's not a big deal. I know it's a challenge. It's not okay. I mean, it's okay. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up is not really on my, it's not really on the new business, but it is. I spoke with the IT guy this morning. He called me. He wants to do Teams with us. He wants to set up Teams with the board. So we need to figure out a day that we want him to come in. I told him possibly next week. But, you know, I think you communicated with him too, as well.
Yeah, Darren. So I know somebody on this board is talented enough, Ms. Reed, to do a doodle poll for us. to see when we could possibly meet to talk with the IT person to do Teams. Is that okay?
Yeah, but just to kind of throw it out there, I think it would be ideal to just do it right before our meeting,
Yeah.
like at 5:30.
Y'all want to do, so,
Should-
what time is your committee? I know you got a committee meeting next Wednesday.
4 o'clock.
So is 5 okay?
And then
Yes.
the subcommittee for the community engagement needs to meet too.
Oh, okay, all right.
But at what
So,
time?
5:30,
They're meeting
if we
5:30.
can.
Okay.
Just trying to get out of that doodle poll, Mr. Reed.
Well, can we meet at, what's the earliest meeting for you guys next week?
So we have the budget and finance that's going to be meeting at 4 o'clock with the city
Yeah.
financial director.
And that's probably going to be an hour, and then community engagement is going to be meeting at 5:30.
So you want to do the following week? There's no,
Y'all meet once a month?
he said there's no rush, but we do need to get set up on Teams.
Will you meet every week, Ms. Lewis? Okay, all right. So what we'll do is let's wait until we determine the flow or the cadence of your meeting, and then we'll come back next week and we'll revisit that. So let's put that on the agenda for
All right, so what do you want me to tell him? Because he reached...
tell him we'll let him know tomorrow. I mean, not tomorrow, I'm sorry, next Wednesday.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, but he won't be doing it next Wednesday, though, correct? Is that
No,
correct?
he
Because
won't.
there's too many other things, okay. And then the last thing that I wanted to bring up that's not on here, and since you're on the Budget Committee, and I guess I'm just asking everyone, would you all, because people from the community are coming in and they're engaging with us, do you think we need business cards to hand out to if someone wants to know how to contact any of us? Do you all think we need that?
Board?
Doesn't hurt.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to it. I am really bad at being able to be readily available. So that's my only concern.
Yeah, I understand. But I'm just saying, like, I don't know. If we're part, I see it as part of community engagement. If we all had business cards, just in case we needed to hand it to someone in the community that we may run into who knows we're on the board and they have an issue.
I'd be interested if we had a central, because concern is the business cards, what number are they going to be calling? My personal cell?
Well, that's an issue. I mean, that's what I'm asking. That's why I'm just throwing it out. They could call the auditors. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out.
No, I don't think it's a bad thing.
No, I think it's a great question.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that centralizing the communication, as Mr. Costa said several times, and I think that the one thing that we can do is we can give our emails out as well, so maybe something that may be good for us to do is create a board roster with our emails on it that we have at these meetings, that we just have a roster over there, so if people want it, they can take it with them, and it has all of our emails on it.
That's an excellent idea.
that's good.
And they can email us. Right.
And I'm not against the business card, I'm just saying that's kind of an easy way that we can, you know.
But everyone doesn't have email also.
What you say?
Everyone doesn't have an email.
That's true.
I mean, I'm just throwing it out. It's up to you all.
I want to, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Costa.
I think this conversation is a lot simpler than it is. I think we just need to create some type of
Central.
physical thing that we can give out to people if that has information about what we do, our emails, and Phil's number if they need to get a hold of somebody.
Okay, yeah. That's what I think as
I'm
well.
in
I agree.
agreement. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm in agreement. I answer 24 hours a day, so anyone that calls after 2 or 3, just give me about 10 seconds to wake up.
With that being said, Mr. Young, if they have concerns and they directly want to talk to one of us, where would they direct? Would we direct that to our chair? Is that
Yes.
the process, Mr. Chair? Okay.
That's usually what
If I
happens
may.
between me and Ms. Anaskevich. That's
Yeah,
usually what happens.
if I may, I had already had a conversation with Mr. Young earlier in the week before I left for Nashville, and I told him if someone from the community calls him and they want to speak with someone on the board, if Mr. Kemp is not available, for him to give me their number, and I will call them, because I don't want my personal phone number out, but I will call them, and I'll call them back immediately, because I know Kemp is also busy with 6 children. And
Productive.
And productive, very productive. So I had already told Mr. Young that he can do that if that's okay with everyone. I guess we can.
And we have one pending.
I'm sorry?
And we have one pending that you will be talking to.
And if there's something that I, that's pressing, I can always text, the chairman about it, because I know he's not always available by phone call, but I can always text him and let him know that I spoke with a private citizen. This is Mr. Young gave me their number. I called them. This is what the issue is, and we can do it like that.
While we're all here this evening, Mr. Young, can you just share with everybody that opportunity that's coming up on May 13th that you mentioned? Because I think it's really helpful for the board to be aware of that community engagement piece.
Great, thank you. On May 13th at WAKR WONE, well, let me back up a little bit. Last year, Jalen Walker was shot and killed because of vehicle defect. And 10 years ago, myself and one of the sergeants, he's a lieutenant at APD now, came up with a program. It's called the Vehicle Safety Inspections. And people can come in on Saturday, May 13th, between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And this is a joint project of the Akron Police Department, the Summit County Sheriff's Department, and the State Highway Patrol. Their cars will be inspected. There are no citations if you have a bald tire or something like that. In the past, we even give gift cards if they have a burned out tail light or license plate light. For the 3 auto establishments, AutoZone, O'Reilly's, and Advance, we also fill up their windshield wiper fluid, and we expect probably 400 people to pass through that line that Saturday, weather permitting. So if any of you get a chance, I made some flyers for you, and this is our 10th year doing this. I'll be coming to you soon on July 13th for our Law Enforcement Education Day, Putting with the Police, which we're going to bring in about 250 youth to Mud Run Golf Course. And this would have been our 9th year, but we missed 2 years due to COVID, and last year I canceled it because of the Jalen Walker incident. So thank you for mentioning that. And I have flyers for all of you.
So I just want to circle back to the communication piece. Ms. Castle, you mind creating a roster and then putting our independent police officers' contact information on it so that we can have it for our meetings to give out to the public?
Absolutely, I'll have that for next Wednesday.
Thank you.
So is there no other? So is that a no on the business cards? No, I think we were going to do it. Oh, okay. Do we have to do a motion for that?
I don't think it's no on the business
Okay.
cards. It's just something that we can get out sooner rather than later.
Okay. So the budget committee will talk, you'll have to
Yeah, I mean,
budget for that.
I think it's as simple as if as board members you want business cards, we get business cards. If that's something that you feel like you want as a board member. Okay. All right. Any other new business?
Really quick, we talked a little bit before the meeting about parking here, and Mr. Young, you had mentioned that the city was willing to give us once a month parking pass to the, I'll let you explain that.
I talked to them Well, I think all of you know I'm on the ACRC board, Akron Civil Rights Commission, and last night I asked where they got their parking permits from. So I made a call today, and almost every board only meets once a month. So they give them parking passes for once a month. And this may be a challenge for a while, but they said, and we have them, I don't know who has the envelope for anyone that parked in the city center today to get those. And I'll keep grinding away to see if I can get them for every week as long as we're doing this. But he did agree to at least once a month right now.
I believe public comment is over. Yes, Ms.
Then I won't tell you where you can free park.
Okay, thank you.
I will send an email to the service director. You guys all have access to my email. If you tell me make and model on license plate, the council lot right next to this building's available. We're currently resurfacing it, so give me a minute. I don't think it's even gonna be done next week, but bump it over. You get me make, model, and license plate number, I'll give that to the service director, and you guys definitely could use the council lot.
Thank you, Kurt.
Yep.
And also, I had talked to the parking attendant a couple of weeks ago, and he said if I wanted to come down there and stand by the booth and sign your tickets, but I'm always the last one out of here because we're making a tape and I have to lock the door. So Mr. Peoples just says, hey, I'll just pay the $20 or whatever and be out of here.
Can we just have you sign our ticket before we leave chambers?
Now I have to be there.
Even if we can create a stamp, that would be good. But I think the,
We used to have stickers, but that all changed about 2 years ago, and now there's a little, just like you do on your phone, that they have to stick through. If our meetings, I think the attendant leaves at 9 o'clock, so if we drag this on another 20, 30 minutes, there won't be anybody there.
it's a good idea.
I'm sorry, I have another question. Did we say we're going to have Darren come in 2 weeks? Here, is it gonna be here at our meeting?
Well,
regular
what
meeting?
we said is we're gonna wait to hear back from Ms. Lewis as far as the cadence of her meeting. And so once we hear back from Ms. Lewis, then we'll get Derek scheduled.
And then I have one thing that I'll keep super quickly. One of the coolest things I've ever been part of was while I was at the law school for the University of Akron. There's a social justice class. It's taught once a year, and every year the class picks a project in which they want to help out with. When I was a third-year law student, we picked the housing crisis throughout the city, and we had our law students, in essence, bring forward ideas, in essence, of how the city could attack the issue. And last night, when I was hanging out with one of my favorite professors, Professor Brent Lee, who does teach the course, we said, well, he had the amazing idea that we kind of talked through, what if this fall's social justice class looked into police policies and procedures to help us out and bring that forward to us. So I thought that was an incredibly cool idea, and that was something I wanted to follow up with him, but I also wanted to bring it forward to you all before I was having any conversations on behalf of the board and making representations. So I just wanted to put that out there and see if that's something that the board would be interested in and that we think that could be valuable. I don't think we need to bring a motion or do anything on it. I wanted to bring it to your attention and I guess just gauge interest.
Incredible idea.
Mr. Giffen, why are you smiling?
I love that idea.
I think it's excellent. You can never go wrong with more education.
Awesome. I'll set something up with Professor Lee and move forward in the conversation and report back out.
Thank you.
Do they have any summer classes? I'm kidding.
Any other new business? Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Giffen?
Aye.
Peoples?
Aye.
Lewis?
Aye.
Castle?
Aye.
Costa? Reed? Boyd? Aye. Thanks so much.